UX Podcast Episode 271.
Hello, I'm Pat Axbom.
And I'm James Roy Lawson.
This is UX Podcast. We're in Stockholm, Sweden, and you're listening in 200 countries and territories in the world, from Norway to Thailand.
Today's a link show. Now, normally I'd say that link shows feature at least two articles that Per and I have discovered in our travels around the internet reading things, which is true this time as well, really. But it's a little bit different.
Yeah, we started listening or listing and suggesting articles to each other in our usual chat. And one of them that you suggested, I started reading that and I realized, well, I could spend so much time with this article. And that article in itself linked off to another article that it was inspired by, and another article it was inspired by. And all of a sudden I was in this link mess, reading different things and getting all these new ideas, which I reasoned, this has to be the thing we spend the time on because we can't do more than one article. We do this one, but also the spin-offs coming out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, basically, Stephen Anderson, who we've talked to on the show a few times, and we've had him on link shows before as well. He's articles on link shows. Now, Stephen has a wonderful mind, and he's got this wonderful ability to write about things and to press the right buttons in my head, or your head too, Per, at least, and probably many other people's heads, to get them thinking about things. And the way in which he explores topic areas and spaces and references other people and brings in other people and other people's work is really inspiring and really does get you thinking. And
because he also shares how his thought process works and where he got his ideas, which is fantastic. Because then you realize, well, I can start with his idea, or I can go back and start with that idea if I want that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we did. Stephen, in a tweet, said he was working on a new article, and I replied to that tweet and I quizzed him a little bit about something I presumed was what he was doing. He mentioned what I thought was the list of articles he annually rereads, so rereads every year. Turns out he doesn't have that, but I really do like the idea of having a collection of articles that you do read every year to remind yourselves of certain processes, thoughts, ideas, spaces to explore. So that's a different show. But Stephen himself references and mentions Christina Woodke as an inspiration, or at least a source of nagging and talking about loops and arcs all the time.
Mm. And loops and arcs seems to be the main inspiration for what Stephen, the journey he went down, exploring this new concept that he was trying to figure out, based on an inherent drive and frustration with a common tool in service design, customer journey maps. And the fact that customer journey maps are always drawn as linear, giving the impression that users always follow the same type of path through a service.
And we, as a profession, we have journey mapping workshops. We do lots of exploratory research and try to produce linear journey maps. And in my teaching to do with analytics, I often bring up journey maps as something. I don't maybe complain about them all the time, but I highlight to people how the linear journey map is not something you see in your data.
Yeah.
It might be a common route through your service or website or so on, but when you look at the data, you see that people are going up and down, left, right. They're traveling through the site in very, very many different ways. So
that reminds me of our interview with Dana Chisnell when we were talking about how people vote. And she looked at the usual customer journey map, or the voter journey map in that case, and looked at that, did her interviews, and looked at it again and realized, well, people aren't moving this way. They're moving in 1,000 different ways to get to the voting booth.
Yeah. So this was for me what really got me excited by Stephen's teases about what he was going to write about. I was triggered by the fact that he was kind of complaining a bit about journey mapping and linear stories in that sense. But should we spool our way back to what we're going to consider to be the beginning of this story?
Loops and arcs.
With Daniel's article, Daniel Wood, wasn't it? Cook. Daniel Cook. He wrote an article back in 2012.
And his article is called Loops and Arcs, fittingly. And it explains loops and arcs from a game mechanics perspective.
Yeah, his tagline on his blog, it says that this is a collection of thoughtful essays on game design theory, art, and the business of design.
Now, UX designers are definitely familiar with the concept of gamification and adding game elements to your designs, often mistakenly thinking that adding scoreboards and stuff like that is what adds to the gamification experience, whereas articles like this really contribute to the understanding of what gaming is and the game mechanics is, in that he explains very well about loops as the smallest component of game design, wherein a person performs an action within a game. Let's say they try to open a door. First, they have to actually understand what they're looking at. They have to have the mental model that they have the possibility of opening something that looks like a door, perhaps. They try that. Something happens. And so the action does something.
Itself, the game itself responds.
So there's a feedback there, and you look at, the door did open. And so now I learned that there was a loop. I can open the door, and so I can go on after that and open a lot of doors. So loops are often
next time you
a
meet
learning
a door,
experience. Yeah.
Next time you meet a door, you will try to exercise your previously learned knowledge on that next door, which will be quicker, effectively, or more successful, I guess, because you've done a knowledge loop already previous in the game.
And the more loops you go through in a game, of course, the more understanding you build and the more confidence you build, and you become confident at playing a game.
So these loops are fractal and occur at multiple levels and frequencies throughout a game. They are almost always exercised multiple times, either within a game or by playing the game multiple times, to quote Daniel's article.
And I think I made the connection when I was reading this. Well, this is how we learn as human beings, of course, as well. When you look at toddlers, they try to stand up and fall down, and they reach for things, and they drop things, and I think Stephen has in his article the putting your hand on a hot plate and pulling it away. Those are also small loops that create understanding that make you more confident to trying again, because you see the feedback, you see what happens, that gives you the confidence to think you may understand how to do it well next time.
Yeah, it's an exploratory learning loop. Model, you've got a model leads to making an action into towards a certain system, and that system gives you feedback, and then you update your mental model and go around. Which actually Daniel points out that pre-computer age, all the games we played are effectively just loops. He lists things like chess, Monopoly, and a lot of these classic games that we used to play, or still play. They're just based on iterative loops the whole time. Like, you get better at learning and understanding the loops, and you sequence, maybe the loops together, or you play certain loops, I guess, during these games to be successful at them. And he points out that it's maybe only when the computer age of games came around, with adventure games, where we started mixing together both loops and arcs. I guess now is probably a time to talk a little bit about arcs.
So arcs is perhaps not the next step. It's like a parallel step, I guess, to loops, in that something that takes you from one point to another without being a loop. It's actually something that you go through and experience, but then you exit it immediately after that. So it's a broken loop, you exit immediately, is what he says. He gives the examples of watch a movie and read a book. I'm thinking within gameplay that it's also those segments of stories that exist between levels sometimes these days, and sometimes even backstories that you're given through a short video before starting an adventure game. So they're actually telling you a story. It's not something that you are doing and getting feedback from. The feedback is just finding out the story.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is where we're experiencing a journey. That you've still got a model. You're still doing something, and there are bounds to that experience, and then you have a result. There's an end point to this, but the point isn't actually learning, updating, and doing it again. Now the point is the whole arc. That is in itself what you're trying to do. So I think the analogy with like adventure games compared to an arcade game, so like things like Pac-Man, then it's designed in a way which makes you want to keep on, coming back and playing it, and you play it multiple times, and you kind of, you want to put another coin in the slot to play it again, going back to, the 80s, 70s, 80s when arcade games really came about. Whereas when you start looking at the adventure games that came maybe in the 80s, 90s, where you taking yourself and character through a game, not to be repeated. I mean, we have lots of these games where once you've played them once, it's done. Exactly. You don't play it again because you've experienced the story arc, and doing it a second time wouldn't deliver any value.
Right.
And that, I think, is one of the points that comes from it, that the value of an arc is in the feedback at the end of the arc itself.
Exactly.
Your payoff, I suppose, as you say, is the feedback at the end, the conclusion.
That makes me think of, I think you and I have talked about on the show before, choose your own adventure games that I absolutely loved. Text-based choose your own adventure games.
Books, paper books.
From the 80s, exactly. Where essentially the text tells you, you wake up in a dark cave, there's light to the east and to the west. And you can write, go east. And you get eaten by a lion. Oh, now I know I don't go east, so I need to go west. That's sort of a small learning loop within the arc, but now you can actually pursue the other path. And in the end, there's not many paths you can pursue. So there's the big arc, but within that arc, lots of small learning loops.
Yeah, they allowed you to have little deviations from the main arc, but they were just moments of distractive exploration, I guess, on your way on the main arc. I mean, there was still one big one designed.
Or teaching you endless. How to pick something up, perhaps, or how to light a fire, or something like that.
Do you want to pause a second, Perry?
Oh, I can hear that. We're keeping that in the show, definitely.
Really?
Yes.
No, we see that we have to explain it.
I know, but yes, because it's a loop. It's the same month, now it's every 3 months,
quarter.
I think.
Yeah, it's every quarter.
Yeah, it's every quarter now. It used to be every month before, that they play this alarm that you're hearing in the background. And this is the test of that system. Same time every quarter, 3 o'clock.
And the point is of the system that you're supposed to be able to hear it from everywhere in Sweden. The danger is over. Where were we?
So what Daniel is doing in this article, he's building up to his point about mixing loops and arcs and actually enhancing the game experience by using combinations of loops and arcs, parallel arcs, and you can also micro parallel arcs. But the parallel arcs would be playing a song at the same time as you're doing something else, and the song actually carries part of the experience.
Micro parallel arcs. That was a bit more difficult to get my head around.
Snippets of evocative stimuli as you progress through the level. And the snippets of evocative stimuli, I mean, only the imagination can be your border there.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was a little bit difficult to understand exactly what that meant, because the definition was as complicated as the phrase itself. So,
I actually don't play Half-Life. He actually says the game Half-Life there, and I don't play that, so I don't know how to explain what he's saying.
Yeah, no, he actually says the article, the Arc is a central rulebook for a larger game consisting primarily of loops.
So he's in conclusion, he's saying that it's easy to stay on like the trodden path of actually doing the same thing, type of gameplay over and over, and the game companies, they build sequels and do the same gameplay again. But he's encouraging people to challenge traditional gameplay by inventing different combinations of loops and arcs. Where you actually don't perhaps need to reach a goal, but he has the examples of build a hobby or create a fortified island nation with an ongoing stream of revenue. So never-ending gameplay, if you will.
Yeah, remove any element of computer game where you can beat or render that game boring or meaningless upon repeated play. So, yeah, fascinating aspects when it comes to game design and game theory. But
so now we have to circle back to Steven Anderson.
Yes.
And how he's using this to cope with his frustration of the linear customer journey maps. You have to also know that as he's explaining his frustration with journey maps, he also references Andrea Rismini, who has an explanation of cross-channel ecosystems that we actually interviewed him on the show about before. And so that is currently one of Steven Anderson's favorite explanations for a non-linear journey map. And I can hear the alarm going off behind you now.
Another thing that references, of course, is his colleague's article, Eric Flower, from 2017. And this article is this is where we introduce another aspect to all of this. So we had arcs and loops, and Eric has his background, I guess, or his writings, at least at this time, were very much around service design. And the article that Stephen references is 3 analogies for the aggregate nature of service design. And it starts off by saying, how do you predict and then shape the behavior of the population? Or better, how do you design for something that is the collection of countless touch points or products that are interlinked, each with their own vastly different user experience? I don't know. I mean, maybe cut to the chase a little bit, Per, in the sense that I think one of the quickest and best ways of getting a feeling for what Eric was talking about in his article is looking at the video, which is linked in his article, and which Stephen links in his article.
Right. They're both inspired by Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, and the video we're talking about, it's actually really, really fascinating. It's basically it's a video from 2013 Gamescom conference where almost 1,000 people played through a level of Super Mario Brothers, and they recorded it, and then they've basically, I suppose, overlaid all these onto the same full level view of that particular part of the Super Mario Brothers game. And what you see in the video is how these 1,000 people, how they progress through the level. And of course, everyone starts off at the very same platform, and they're jumping down, they're kind of they're jumping up, they're hitting things, they're bouncing back, they're resetting, trying again, and then as time goes on, it's like a crest of a wave kind of thing. There's more and more people get further and further into the game and succeed in taking themselves further and further into the level. And there's still, even when you get right towards the end, there's still people who are completely lost and are completely stuck still at a very early point in the level.
Right.
But by and large, you can see how there is. I think Stephen in his article talks about how you can, I suppose, if you squint, if you just kind of like blur things a little bit, you can see the golden path through the level. That people, there is a kind of a desired path through the level, but it's not the only path through the level.
Which is not really the point, but yeah, exactly. It's what he says.
Yeah, it's not the point, and it's not the only way through it. It's not the only way of succeeding, I guess, of the level.
But the point rather is then what they are going through, what all the players are going through is the same thing, the landscape that they are traversing. So what Stephen goes on to call the terrain,
Yeah.
and which is what we as designers are creating. And what Eric and Stephen have been discussing, that the role we are playing is designing that landscape or terrain, or even he's using the phrase sandbox, which seems to be Stephen's favorite term, which means that they feel that they're seeing the role as quite different from most designers. So it's not designing for the person and the perfect path that they can take through the terrain, but they're designing the terrain so that the person can choose their own path.
Well, this whole thing with terrain, though, this is what Stephen and Eric, I guess, are talking has been like a third element of thinking about service design. And the whole thing about design, it's interesting. I mean, Stephen has talked about it from a viewpoint of controlling the terrain or designing the terrain. Well, I mean, it's maybe a bit, I don't know, maybe it's not quite that. A quote here: think of terrain as the environment or ecosystem in which all players play. Yeah, it's a sandbox itself. If there's a national park with dozens of trails, which was Eric's example, the terrain is the entire park itself. That's the quote from Stephen's article. But I think it's kind of more, this feels to me that terrain is like the current realm. It's the extent and state of the world as we can currently observe it and map it. So Stephen in the article talks about how you can I think the example was like a shop, or Eric's example was a shop. Like you get a building, and then you can do things in that building. You can take down a wall, or you can add some surfaces, counters, or whatever. You can work in that space.
Right.
But your space is finite, known, and mapped. You have this is the sandbox you have to play with. Now, in some situations, that's going to be something we design and create. In other situations, it's going to be something we've mapped or inherited.
Right.
And reflects our current understanding of that space, or our current extent of influence over the space. It might be that we can't control beyond this place, so we're maybe there's like a, in some way I start thinking about like Stephen Hawking's and Brief History of Time, and like Noble Universe, and like the where we get to the point where like black holes start sucking in all light, and it's like, can you see beyond that? And where's the end to our observable universe? And it's you get quite. This is where I say the thinking starts to really kick
parallel
in. Stuff.
Universes. But the thing is, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about like infinite spaces, because I've been working on Mural the past couple of days, and you can actually expand the worksheet to whatever size you want it to be, and you can add tools, and you can work there, and that is your space. But then I also use other online whiteboards, but I can't easily move the objects in that space to my other space. So if we take the broader perspective, is that I am a person moving between different spaces, and you as a designer can't control all of them. You cannot. So either you accommodate that, or you just allow me to be in my space and take stuff with me, or you confine me to that space and say, no, you cannot.
Yes, this is an excellent example, because there, from a terrain perspective, then you'd maybe want to map all of those related spaces, because within those related spaces, there are loops that are beneficial to you and transferable between spaces.
Exactly. Yes.
So you might do a loop in tool C, and you might actually cause frustration in tool B. And this is something else we talked about with Jared Spool calls this current knowledge. That consistency is not always the thing you aim for. It's more, what does the person understand and know? So we can translate that to be, what loops have they performed, and what loops will be useful in our terrain to help them on an arc.
Exactly.
I mean, in some ways I see this as thinking back to Andrea Racemi's eco mapping ecosystem mapping when he has all the circles and the lines connecting between it, and he uses different colours to kind of, I suppose, light up connected journeys or a path through the ecosystem.
Right. This is
And
one possible path. That's another possible path.
Yeah. So in some ways you can just like, this one we're going to look at, this one we're going to look at now. And I started to think about the how you would like chart the seas. You have to have a map of the seas, a chart of the seas, in order to safely navigate the seas. Like you need to know there's rocks there and there's rocks there. There's not one way to sail across the ocean. But to sail across the ocean safely, you have to have a map of the sea. Someone has to have mapped it so you understand the space that you're sailing in.
Yep.
I think this...
And you have to trust the map.
You have to trust the map. And, or rather, you have to maybe be open that the map's not maybe correct. Because, like, if we go a bit way back and talking about, like, my example about the known universe, I guess, and how far you can see, then once upon a time, in fact, some people still do, the Earth thought the Earth was flat. So the maps at that point were only as defined and as big as the flat world, and they worked perfectly okay until you reached the edge of them. So what's important there was not to fear going over the edge; it was more to be open to the fact that your map could be updated.
Right, and most maps are wrong. This is a favorite topic of mine because we have the Mercator projection that's up in every classroom around the world. It makes a lot of sense for time zones because you can just draw straight lines and that's a time zone. But I mean, that's not the way the world looks. The sizes of the countries aren't correct. The distances between countries aren't correct. So it's just weird. But it serves one purpose, and so other maps serve other purposes. I don't know where we ended up now, but this is the fun thing about this type of topic is that it's exciting because it makes you think about different topic areas and it makes you make connections between things that you haven't thought about in a while, but perhaps could they be relevant to the thing that actually I think Stephen is working towards as we're continuing with this article.
Yeah. No, this is really managed to get me quite excited about ways which we could further explore mapping and journey mapping. With this whole thing where people are experiencing loops, and in the loops we update our current knowledge, our mental models, and then from there we go on arcs where we string together a series of loops or knowledge segments, and string that together to achieve things. And that thing we achieve is just one of many possible outcomes. And this really does feel like a space which can help me design better environments and understand people's use of those environments better.
Exactly. I think the point that Stephen makes about the order of things, it actually gave me an aha moment. Now, we talked about this as arcs and loops, and we ended on terrain, but the real order he's saying is number 1, terrain, number 2, loops, and number 3, arcs. And the reason it's in that order is about control, because you can control the terrain much more than you can control the loops and arcs, and much more than you can control the person within that terrain and loops and arcs and how they are reacting. But the interesting thing is that you can try and control the way the people move through your terrain, or you can allow them to move the way they want, but just keep the terrain understandable and workable for them.
Yeah. I'm not completely sure. I mean, that whole thing about which order it is, it's really interesting. Because it loops back again to what I say about what we discussed about where does the end of your terrain that you can control end and start, and how much does it interplay with other terrains.
It all depends on if you say you're working on service design, you're working with a specific product. But that is actually, as we were talking before, that is limiting the space to something that is not a sense of the world the way that each user sees it, of course, because they're moving across different sites, different webs, and they're moving offline and reading even books, choose your own adventure books in paper.
So maybe what we've come to here, Per, is we've added a fourth to this, haven't we? Because you've got loops, arcs, terrains, but then Eric talks in the article a lot about the holistic nature of things.
Yeah.
But I guess what we're talking about now is that yes, the terrain is that space that you're really interested in, the national park or the product, but you can still zoom out, one level further, or at least another bigger level, and start looking at the broader landscape.
Which is really what Rosmini is talking about when he's saying cross-channel. Now that I think about it, because he's talking specifically about moving between different types of services.
Yeah, and interconnecting services and things that the example that Andrea's used when we talked to him is with buying a cinema ticket or going to the cinema. That you it's not just about buying a ticket on a website. It's about arranging with friends that you're going to go, deciding on a film, obtaining the tickets, taking yourself to the cinema, getting yourself ready to go into the experience, buying snacks and so on, going through the experience itself, and then getting home again at the end of it. So when it comes to mapping the experience, it's cross-channel and multi-domain. Maybe domains is a thing above terrains.
This is interesting because then it's easier to get stuck in this model, I think, when we are specifically talking about game mechanics, because you're within the game and the game is the thing. That is where you want to attempt where you want to achieve your goals. But as we're working with online tools, the end game is usually not the tool, but something else that you're trying to achieve outside in your own real world space, together with other people, which means that we have to take that into account. We have to think broader than the specific service that we're looking at just now.
But that's the same for all the things, isn't it? Even if it's an e-commerce website, the point isn't the website.
Exactly. Yeah.
The point is, if you're going to a website to buy a new spade, then the point is buying a new spade.
The point is planting your damn bushes.
Oh yeah.
No, the point is showing off your bushes to your neighbor. No, the point is inviting your neighbor to dinner. No, so I mean, yeah.
But I want to show off my new spade.
Damn, that's a nice looking spade, James.
Wow, that's a great bush. Probably
Did
time
we
to
get
wrap
out
up.
of control here? I think we actually stayed on topic a bit, though.
We did. Until the end.
I think, one of the huge purposes of this show was to actually acknowledge the fact of how interesting it is to just explore blog posts. This reminded me of how internet was like for me way back, like 15, 20 years ago, when I was just reading different blogs, linking between those blogs, moving between them and seeing how people were talking about each other's findings and insights and building on that and having fun with it.
Yeah.
Without it having to be so well thought out before you actually put it out to the world.
I think this really nicely ties us back to what we said at the beginning, that this was a journey through a tweet, related conversations that people had in the tweet. It's an article from 2012, an article from 2017, and a summary article with some new thinking from 2021. You're right. This is wonderful how thoughts can mature, develop, be brought up again, thought through again. It's a real nice feeling, and I enjoy doing these little exploratory thinking sessions with these articles.
And huge thanks to everyone who puts down the time to actually write all this stuff and share it, and just be open about, this is something I'm thinking about. What do you think?
And you can, of course, listen to some recommended listening, and a really, really relevant one is episode 144, which is anticipatory design and cross-channel ecosystems, which is a two-part. It's two people in one show there, because we used to do that kind of thing when we went to events. We recorded double interviews and squeezed them into one show. But that's actually a chat with Sarah Doody and a chat to Andrea Rosmini. Really worth listening to.
Oh, that is one. Excellent. And that interview with Sarah Doody, I think, is relevant. Well, everything we do is relevant.
Same. Everything we do is irrelevant.
I think there will be so many links in this show, actually, which will be loads of fun. And I know we have volunteers these days that help us out with that, which is fantastic.
They do, which is really, really great.
And all of that, of course, can be found, along with the transcript, on uxpodcast.com, and maybe even where you're listening right now.
Yep. So click follow, subscribe, add us already if you aren't doing so already, and join us again for our next episode.
And if you'd like to contribute to funding UX Podcast, then visit uxpodcast.com/support. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side. So, Per, how do the Mario Brothers surf the internet?
I don't know, James. How do the Mario Brothers surf the internet?
With a web browser.
I can't believe you found a topical joke.